Our next presentation is going to be on opportunities for physicians as a medical science liaison, which is an absolutely fantastic field which a lot of doctors go into. We're very pleased to have back presenting for us Dr. Nabhan Islam. Dr. Islam is an accomplished medical science liaison, also known as an MSL, and he's based in Vancouver, Canada. He first broke into the industry in 2019 and has since worked for a number of companies that I can't pronounce, but I can pronounce GSK, Syneos Health, and currently Sanofi, Sanofi. I don't know how to say that because I'm not in the pharmaceutical industry, across multiple therapeutic areas, including respirology, vaccines and infectious disease, and type 1 diabetes. Dr. Islam is a member of the MSL Society and the Medical Affairs Professional Society, also known as MAPS, and has a long-standing history of coaching and training aspiring medical science liaisons. Prior engagements include workshops at the MSL Society Annual Conference, editorials for the MSL Society Journal, and guest appearances on the MSL Talk podcast. In 2024, Dr. Islam began offering professional coaching and consulting services, and we have a copy of his website up here on the screen, on a one-on-one basis with a focus on Canadians, international medical graduates, foreign medical graduates, and visible minorities. Dr. Islam received his undergraduate degree from Western University in 2022 and his MD from St. George's University in 2007. And he also served as a medic with the Canadian Forces Army Reserve from 1999 to 2005. And he's a Sikh alumnus. So a warm welcome and thanks to Dr. Nabhan Islam.
Hey, thanks, Jim, for that very effusive introduction. So I guess I'll just go ahead and start my presentation. Okay, so my name is Dr. Nabhan Islam. I am an MSL based in Vancouver, Canada. The title of my talk is So You Want to Be an MSL. For those of you who attended SEEK 2023, you might remember these slides. If you weren't able to attend, hopefully you'll still find them very useful. So I do have to state for the record that the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are my own and don't reflect any official position by my current or any previous employers. SEEK will be making a charitable donation in my name for this presentation. As Jim mentioned, I currently do provide MSL Medical Affairs career coaching services on a fee-for-service basis, and I have no other conflicts of interest to declare. So I just want to start off by telling you a little bit about my journey. This is usually interesting for most people. So I got my Bachelor of Medical Sciences from the University of Western Ontario, now just Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. During that time, I was a medic with the Army Reserve from 1999 to 2005. And in 2003, I went up to medical school in the Caribbean to St. George's University. So I did my preclinical years in the Caribbean and my clinical years primarily in New York City. So while I was applying for residency, I took up a part-time job as a medical instructor. So I was basically teaching first aid and defibrillation for government, corporate, healthcare, and daycare clients in the Toronto area. As I was having difficulty matching, that part-time job turned into a full-time job and actually ended up doing it for almost more than a decade. When I basically realized that I wasn't going to be able to match, I had to decide what I was going to do with my life. My best friend, who is actually now a university professor, told me about the MSL role. He put me in touch with someone in his lab who had made the jump. I got in touch with her. She gave me some really helpful advice. And basically what I ended up doing is joining the MSL Society. I did some training with them. I attended their annual conference, and then basically I started applying to industry. So my first industry position, my first MSL role was with GSK. This was a one-year contract in respiratory medicine covering British Columbia. I then joined a CCO, a contract commercial organization called Syneos Health. They represented a client called VBI Vaccines. So I was an MSL representing Western Canada in the vaccines and infectious disease space for 2 years. And as of this year, 2024, I started with Sanofi, representing autoimmune type 1 diabetes, again, for Western Canada. And that's where I am today. So As Jim mentioned, just out of gratitude for breaking into the industry to sort of pay it forward, for all the help and advice I'd received over the years, I sort of started doing like these little side projects for the MSL community. So if my memory serves me correctly, in 2021 at the MSL Society Annual Conference, I hosted a workshop for aspiring MSLs called Starting Off on the Right Foot, Best Practices. That's pretty self-explanatory. The following year, I ran a CV workshop. So it was called Course of Life, an interactive workshop. So basically, candidates brought in their CVs. We kind of critiqued each other. We broke up into small groups, trying to improve them. And I talked about essentially the industry format, and we had some recruiters from my company there to answer questions. So it was all, very interactive. My first podcast was called Business Acumen, the other MSL currency. So you'll hear a lot about insights, and people will say, insights are the currency of MSLs, but I think you also need to have a really good business acumen to be successful as an MSL. So I did a podcast about that. Feed the Troll was my first publication for the MSL Society Journal. Basically, it's just an article about essentially giving recruiters what they want, right? So just like a video game, you have some freedoms to explore the video game and kind of do what you want, but there are certain bottlenecks where you just have to do what the video game wants or you're not going to progress. Clinical practice to MSL. This was a panel discussion on MSL talks. So we had basically the experiences and the viewpoints of some not so traditional MSL. So there's myself as the physician. We had a nurse practitioner. We had a PA. So it was a really good discussion. 8 Rules of MSL Club was the title of my 2023 SEEK presentation. It wasn't recorded, so you had to be there to get it. The increasing complexity of today's interview process was my most recent podcast. Basically, I was just reflecting on how difficult interviews have become over the last 5 years, at least from my perspective. And So You Botched an Interview Question is actually going to be my latest journal article. It's been accepted for publication, so hopefully by the time anyone is watching this, it should be live on the website. So what are MSLs? So MSLs are scientific and disease state experts who conduct unbiased, fair, and balanced scientific exchange. So there's 3 words that I want everyone to focus on. So the first one is unbiased. What that means essentially is that you are essentially not upplaying your company's efficacy and downplaying your safety signals. And conversely, you're not doing the opposite for your competitors. You're not basically trying to oversell their safety signals and downplaying their efficacy. You basically have to present the data as it is. Fair means that you are drawing attention to or pointing out alternative treatments or alternative molecules, even if they're as good as or even better than your own molecule. Okay, you have to basically give clinicians all of their options, so to speak. And balance means that you're spending an equal amount of time essentially on efficacy as well as safety. Right? You have to be able to inform physicians so they have an accurate benefit to risk profile when they're deciding treatment options for their patients. Okay, so this is really the crux of how we conduct our conversations with KOLs, our key opinion leaders. The MSL position, believe it or not, was created in 1959 by Upjohn Pharmaceuticals. It's now part of Viatris. Originally, they were selected from the most experienced sales reps, and that makes sense, right? They'd been in the field for years and years. They knew their customers inside and out. They knew the product inside and out. So logically, for the first MSLs, they were the best choice. Nowadays, MSLs are primarily PharmDs, PhDs, and MDs, and they're recruited from academia and clinical practice. The industry has really shifted to a peer-to-peer model. So what that means essentially is they want doctors talking to other physicians. So essentially, almost all MSLs these days are expected to have a terminal degree. They're expected essentially to have a title of doctor. There are MSLs who are advanced care practitioners that have, for example, they may have, for example, their nurse practitioner or some other master's program, and they can be MSLs. But for the most part, most MSLs these days do hold a doctorate or equivalent. One of the most helpful little pearls I got from MSL Society is that being an MSL, it's really a communications position about science, as opposed to a scientific position that you have to communicate. So if anyone here has ever defended a thesis, that is a scientific position that you are trying to communicate, and that is not what an MSL is being about. This is a communications position, like you are literally a liaison. So what that means basically is that you are the face of the company for the medical community, and conversely, you are the face of the medical community for the company. You really need high emotional intelligence. You need to be sort of be a people person, or at least diplomatic. You really need to know how to adapt the content of your conversation for the various, people that you're going to be running into. It's going to be doctors, it's going to be allied healthcare professionals, it could be government officials, it could be a lay person. So communication and adapting your communication is a very important skill for MSLs. So this chart is from the MSL Society. So every year they do a survey, essentially asking MSLs and MSL leaders, what they're doing. So this is from the 2022 salary and compensation survey. I'm not going to go through this line by line. I'm just going to focus on the first 5 in the darker blue. This was out of 1,000 MSLs, more or less. This was reported by over 90%. So essentially, if you are going to be an MSL, almost guaranteed you are going to be doing these activities. So attending medical conferences, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's obviously where the latest and greatest research is presented. It's where essentially, researchers go to showcase themselves. It's where, physicians go to learn about cutting edge treatment. It's where they go to network and to catch up with one another. So attending medical conferences, not surprising at all. KOL relationship management essentially means like establishing and maintaining and kind of nurturing KOL relationships. KOLs, key opinion leaders, these are essentially the leading physicians in your field. And there's various criteria we use to describe them, but these are considered to be sort of the influential physicians. These are physicians that other physicians turn to for advice about their patients, or advice about treatment options, advice about other things. So you're going to be, responsible for that for your territory. So essentially, it would be unheard of to be an MSL and not to be, taking care of your KOLs. Educating KOLs and other HCPs, essentially you're going to be keeping your KOLs up to date with basically the latest in clinical data. You're going to be feeding them safety updates. You could be educating them about, fundamental sciences. You could be educating them about something about access for your molecule, for example, a patient support program. And this would extend to all members of the healthcare team. So it's not just doctors, but also other HCPs. And then gathering insights. So I mentioned earlier, gathering insights. Insights are the currency of MSLs, is really kind of what we deal with, right? Insights basically tell the company like why physicians do the things that they do, right? We read about things in textbooks, we read about things in practice guidelines, but we get out into the real world, we find it's not always like that. And, why is that? And that's, basically the insights. So these insights have to be collected, they have to be organized, they have to be prioritized, and they have to be reported to the appropriate departments. Okay, some could be for medical, but there are insights that could be applicable to commercial, to government affairs, to research and development. So it's your job as MSL to make sure that they get to where they need to be. And then lastly, delivering scientific presentations. I will take this to mean like delivering a formal, presentation, for example, at a congress or at a symposium. You could be delivering for a formulary committee. You could be delivering to a government organization or an NGO. And essentially you, as the MSL, are essentially the speaker and the subject matter expert. The audience is going to be asking you about your company's science, your company's data, your company's safety. There's a couple more here, and I just want to highlight that are probably very relevant. You may have heard of before. Competitive intelligence gathering. So you're expected to have a handle on your territory, and that includes what the competition is up to. So not only what do they have to offer in terms of treatment, but essentially like what are they doing in their field? Are they having events? Are they having symposiums? Are they sponsoring this? Are they sponsoring that? What are they doing in your territory? because essentially we're all competing for face time with our KOLs, and then supporting ad boards. Okay, so ad boards are working groups made up of physicians when companies can't get the advice that they need internally. So they will bring in, 4, 5, 6 experts from their field, give them a few topics to talk about. They'll talk about it for a day, and then they'll sort of come up with recommendations and a plan of action for the company. So this is a very seminal activity that's conducted by most MSLs. So why do people make the jump? So a lot of you may appreciate this. Maybe you were pushed into medicine by your family, or maybe there was a cultural expectation. And now that you're a physician, you find that you don't like it for whatever reason. Perhaps you've been practicing medicine for quite some time and you don't like it anymore. Okay, I chose this quite deliberately. I'm sure that during COVID, after COVID, we all felt or looked like this. So maybe, you find that just medicine isn't for you anymore. We want better work-life balance. This is really, really common. Perhaps, you've started a new family. Perhaps you want more time to spend with, your kids or your grandkids. Perhaps you're getting closer to retirement and salary isn't really an issue anymore. Whatever reason, people always essentially want work-life balance, and generally, not only is the MSL role conducive to work-life balance, but the industry as a whole. It's very tragic when this happens, but some people do develop disabilities later in life. They could have problems with their visual acuity. They could have problems with their hand-eye coordination, and they find that essentially that clinical practice isn't an option anymore. So being an MSL, is a really good option. This happened to me personally. I wasn't able to match, and then I eventually became uncompetitive. And essentially, from the number of people that are reaching out to me personally through LinkedIn and at conferences, this is becoming more and more common. So, you think to yourself, what do I do with my education? What do I want to do with my experience? How can I put this to good use? Similarly, you could be an IMG. You might have a medical license from overseas. When you get to the US, you find that it's too difficult. You might be required to complete a preceptorship. You might have to repeat your residency. There could be a return of service agreement that you don't agree to. Whatever the reason, there could be insurmountable obstacles to getting your US license. Some people are looking for a different challenge. So maybe you've been a clinician for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and it just doesn't have the same appeal. There's no opportunity for growth and development. You feel like you're not learning anything new. You feel that you're essentially at the top of your game, and you're looking for a different challenge. So industry can offer that. And there could be other reasons, but I think by far and large, most people will probably fall into one of these 7 categories. So what are the pros and cons of getting into this field? So I think one of the biggest advantages is that you are going to be, leveraging your education and your clinical experience. Okay, everyone here, I'm sure, basically, went to undergrad for 3 or 4 years, went to medical school for 4 years, and if you completed your residency, that's a minimum of 3 years. And we don't want that education. We don't want that clinical experience to go to waste. So being an MSL lets you take advantage of all of that education, a lot of that experience. And, personally speaking, that's very gratifying. The other aspect is that you're still able to improve patient care. You're just doing it indirectly by helping other clinicians to make better decisions for their patients, or you're working to make medicines more accessible to patients, overall. And that is very gratifying. Okay? I don't think anyone really considers themselves to be antisocial. We don't hate our patients. We don't hate medicine. It's just that we want to do something else. So being an MSL lets you leverage your education and your experience, and really lets you help to improve patient care in a broader and indirect way. Work-life balance. So as an MSL, you're basically able to set your own schedule. So if you're the kind of person who wants to wake up every day at 4 a.m. and then clock off at noon, you can do that. If you need to take a day off to go for a doctor's appointment, or because a sofa is being delivered, you can do that. You're setting your own schedule. You can decide when you do work and when you don't work. Along the same lines, this is a results-based environment. So you are going to have your role and responsibilities. You're going to have a list of tasks and assignments. They're going to have deadlines, but as long as they get done, no one really cares how you spend your time. So again, you can work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and take every Friday off if it suits you. As long as the work gets done, the company's happy. So again, if you're that kind of person, that is very gratifying. Travel. So this is a big perk. MSLs are usually expected to be in the field 50, 60, 70, 80% of the time. So there's going to be a lot of travel within your territory. There could be occasional travel nationally or even internationally, typically for conferences. On top of that, you're being paid to travel. So essentially, if your suitcase is delayed or your suitcase is lost or your flight is delayed or something along those lines, that's coming out of the company's pocketbook. So again, it's quite a relief, when you're traveling and you run into these issues to know that you're going to be taken care of. So the other nice perk is that if you're going somewhere new, what a lot of MSLs do was basically just to tack on a personal day, and then you can go explore and see somewhere new. And again, if you like to travel, if you like to see and experience new things, that is very gratifying. And then lastly, there's a lot of career branches in medical affairs. So after you have a couple of years of experience under your belt, you'll find that there's quite a bit of opportunity in industry. So for example, you could become an MSL manager. So typically you might start off with a small team at a regional level, then become a national manager, and then you could potentially become a global manager. If you're more interested in the science, you could essentially move from MSL to medical advisor. And then from medical advisor, you could work into head office, working more on like medical strategy or strategic partnerships. And the path goes on and on. You could also branch out into pharmacovigilance. There are opportunities in regulatory and government affairs. Whatever you're interested in, you'll probably find that there's a good match for you in most big companies. So what's not great? So you're not going to be on top of the food chain. So, speaking from, the standpoint of a physician, there's a very clear hierarchy in healthcare, right? Essentially, you have, the medical students, you have the interns, the junior residents, the senior resident, the chief resident, and then the attending. And then you have the nurses, the technicians, the phlebotomists, the extended healthcare team. But at the end of the day, the attending, has final say over the patient care. So that is not going to be the case. You are not going to be on top of the food chain. You are not always going to get your way. Sometimes we do have to yield to marketing or commercial interests, and that's just a business decision. So you have to get used to that. Job availability and stability are not guaranteed. So just like the economy is prone to boom and bust, the pharmaceutical industry also is prone to boom and bust. I'm sure everyone here can appreciate that sometimes clinical trials don't meet their primary endpoints, and these molecules are pulled from the market. So those people essentially would lose their jobs overnight. Sometimes molecules make it to market, and then after a few years, they're withdrawn, typically over safety concerns. So again, those people could potentially lose their jobs overnight. So, stability, long-term stability is not always guaranteed. And then job availability, typically you're going to be expected to live in a major city with access to an airport. So depending on where you live right now, there may or may not be kind of MSL jobs available. So just using the Pacific Northwest, because that's where I live. Essentially, if I was going to be an MSL, I essentially would be confined to basically Vancouver, Victoria, Calgary, and Edmonton. If you're down south in the US, you're essentially living in Seattle or in Portland. There's really no way around it. You really have to be kind of in a big city with access to the major hospitals, the university hospitals. You need access to the airport so you can travel to do your job. So that could be an obstacle. Salary hit. So I'm not privy to what everyone makes, but from what I remember from medical school, even a family physician could be expected to make, probably 200 to 350K a year. So industry is not going to be paying that. You're going to be probably taking a hit of 50%, more or less. I have a table coming up to show you the actual numbers, but it's safe to say that industry does not pay what clinical practice pays. The drudgery of corporate life. So Jim can understand this morning because I had meetings and we had to move this presentation and the meetings were canceled. So then we came back to the original time slot. This happens all the time. There are expense reports. You have to essentially account for all of the money that you're spending on behalf of the company. So every 2 weeks, you have to scan your receipts, submit expense reports. You're going to be issued IT equipment. Every IT department in the world is the same. Okay, you're going to have to open a ticket. It's going to get escalated. It's going to go in circles a few times, and it's going to take days, if not weeks, to get the simplest of things done. Okay, and this is just corporate life, right? You have these companies are several thousand or tens of thousands of people, and sometimes things move very, very slow. And then reputational damage. So there's a question mark here. I think back in the day, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was this feeling that if you joined industry, you were essentially making a deal with the devil, or you were basically selling your soul, you were joining the dark side. I don't think that's really the case anymore. I think there's enough physicians who have had contact with MSLs to know what they do and to realize that they value that they bring, and they know that industry can be a force for good. Patient support programs are a really good example of that. You're basically patients who are able to access the molecule because of typically income concerns. They're getting access to the molecule, for free, and the company is covering that. So that's, those are really good programs. I do have to point out that if you're coming from academia, this is almost certainly going to be a one-way ticket. My understanding is once you leave academia, you're out. So just keep that in mind. A practicing physician, if they find that this isn't for them, could obviously just go back to clinical practice, but that's not going to be an option if you're coming from academia. So just make sure you consider the consequences if you decide to go this route. Okay, so this again is from the 2022 salary and compensation survey. This is US specific. I'm not going to go through this cell by cell. I just want you to focus on the second row. This is essentially what an entry level MSL salary could be expected to be. So the mean, the average, is 161,000, but there's a range from 100,000 to 210,000. Now you might think to yourself, okay, it's an entry-level position. I understand salaries may not be great. What can I expect to be making in 5 years? What can I expect to be making when I'm an experienced MSL? So if you go down a couple of rows, after 5 or 6 years, that the average is 194,000. But again, there's a range from 105 to 236. So again, I don't know what you make, but this is probably less than that. Now, that being said, there's always typically a benefits package that tends to be quite generous. So you will definitely get a medical, dental, life, and long-term disability. You will get a company car or a stipend to essentially lease a company car. There will be something for your retirement. You will have paid vacation. Typically 3 weeks is the average. You may have stock options. Some companies offer tuition grants or reimbursement. Parental leave is usually quite generous, and there will be various perks for travel and things like that. So to anyone looking at this, I would just say, consider the whole package, right? There are tangible benefits like the salary and your benefits, and then there's the intangible aspect, which is essentially your work-life balance, and that in itself is worth something as well. So put everything together and then decide if this package is something you can live with. So what do MSLs do on a typical day? So this would be considered, what I would call a slack day. Basically, you're just working from home. So you're going to wake up in the morning, catch up on email. Typically, you will have your team meetings in the morning, so typically half an hour to an hour apiece. Hopefully, you scheduled a meeting with your KOL. This could be done through Zoom or Teams. And then afterwards, you have to report the insights while the details are still fresh in your head, and you have to respond to MIRs. So MIRs are medical information requests. So basically, if a healthcare professional asks the company for information, the company has a legal obligation to respond to those HCPs. So these have to be done on a timely basis. So I'm essentially try and do it same day. And then in the afternoon, with a couple hours you have left, typically this is spent, sort of doing some of the other things. So for example, there could be an ad board coming up. So you're going to spend, some time working on the ad board, making sure that everything is set up. You will have to get caught up on journal articles and, your competitors. So you might spend some time reading a research article or something along those lines. And then you will have admin, right? For example, your expense reports. So this is like, what I would call, a typical 9 to 5 day. So when you're in the field, your days become a little longer. So we'll say you wake up a little earlier to catch up on your email. You run off to Starbucks, get some coffee, drive to your KOL's office. You're going to have a meeting, hopefully for half an hour to an hour. Since you're in the field, you want to make use of that time. So hopefully pick up lunch, have a second lunch meeting with your KOL. And then afterwards, you might, again, go to Starbucks, open up your laptop, start to report insights, start to respond to those MIRs. And then you might work on, again, some of the ancillary things. So working on your ad board, reading a journal article, working on your expense report, and then eventually you have to drive to the airport and get home. So you can see that when you're in the field, your days do become a little longer. So attending a conference. So I'm not going to read this line for line, but you can see there's a pattern here. Basically, the more time you spend in the field, the more time you spend in the field, if that makes sense. So typically at a conference, you have to get up quite early. You're going to have a briefing with your team. You have to set up your medical booth. There will be plenary sessions, breakout sessions that you have to cover all day long. There's typically networking breaks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. There's networking lunch in the evening. There's almost always a reception or a poster gallery. Your company or the organizers of the conference will typically host dinner events. And then finally, eventually you get back to your hotel and then you have to kind of do all the things that you were supposed to do. So again, your days are getting very long. If these conferences go on for several days, this can be very, very exhausting. So the moral of the story is like really as an MSL, no 2 days are the same. Some days are a little slack. Some days are, very, very, very busy. You're going to be busy and you're going to have a lot of things to manage. So it really is not the typical 9 to 5 office job. So what about your job prospects? So the industry does need more MSLs. I remember from medical school, when I was trying to memorize all of the biologics, there were only about 20 of them, and they all fit on one piece of paper. Nowadays, there are so many biologics, I can't even keep track of. So the number of therapeutic classes is growing, and there's more molecules in each of those classes. So we need essentially more MSLs to essentially keep the medical community up to date. Precision medicine is expanding. So it started off in oncology. It's kind of been trickling down into the other specialties. But even now, working in diabetes, I can see that it's coming. We just can't lump our patients into buckets and just kind of throw medicine at them. We really have to tailor our medication. We really have to tailor treatment for each of our patients. So again, we need MSLs to sort of explain this to physicians to make sure that they're implementing the standard of care. Biologics, immunomodulators, antineoplastics, these protocols change every single day. The way that we treat breast cancer, for example, today is not the same way that we did it 5 years ago. It's not the same way that we did it 10 years ago. And this pretty much goes for any disease. So again, we need MSLs to keep physicians informed of all of these changes. COVID-19 was another great example. Every day there were a dozen new studies about the vaccines, about their safety signals, about their interactions with other medications, or their interactions or implications for other diseases. And again, this is where MSLs can really demonstrate their value, keeping physicians up to date with all of these rapid changes. Clinicians actually do prioritize and value time with their MSL. So this is not supposition on my part. MSL Society puts out surveys with physicians and KOLs asking them Do you meet with industry? Who do you meet with? How long do you spend with them? And that sort of thing. And they found that even during COVID-19, that their contact with MSLs was the same or actually even increased. The people that took the hit were actually the sales reps. They're the ones that couldn't get any face-to-face time. And now that we're in the post-COVID era, this is really kind of carried forward. MSLs really did, I think, a fantastic job demonstrating our value to clinicians, and now clinicians know that, and they want to keep that momentum moving forward. So clinicians really want face time with MSLs. They do not want face time with sales reps. And companies are starting to realize this, and again, companies are starting to sort of prioritize MSLs. So at the end of the day, it sounds glib, but essentially, the more face time you have with your HCPs, the more familiar they are with your science and your products, the more likely it is they're going to be using your product versus a competitor, all things being equal. If they're using your product, that means you have a better market share, that means you have better revenue, and that means that the company is generating better profit. So at the end of the day, more MSLs, one way or the other, leads to better profitability for the company. And most companies have sort of realized this. So the industry definitely, needs more MSLs. Now, that being said, the industry needs more physician MSLs. So historically, medical affairs have been dominated by PharmDs and PhDs. So again, the MSL Society does a survey every year. I've been following them for quite some time. Generally speaking, 10 to 15% of MSLs are MDs, and the rest are evenly split between PharmDs and PhDs. So overwhelmingly, you will find the majority of your colleagues are PharmDs and PhDs. That being said, there's a skill set that physicians bring that they can't match, and it should be kind of obvious, but essentially we are clinicians from day one. Okay, we have the bedside manner. We're the ones that are keeping up to date with clinical science. We're the ones who actually define what standard of care is. We know what's important to patients. We know what's important to our fellow clinicians, and that sort of thing. Now, that being said, we don't always do a very good job of illustrating this. So when physicians come to me and they tell me that they have difficulty with the recruiter, they're having difficulty with the hiring manager, it's not because you're unintelligent, it's not because you're unskilled, it's because you're not doing a very good job highlighting what we call the transferable skills. So transferable skills are the skills that you have now that would also be useful in industry. So I always make this joke, you have to explain it to people like they're toddlers, right? You just have to assume they have no idea about how medicine or the practice of medicine actually is. And you have to kind of paint them a picture about what you can do for them. So I have some examples here. Understanding what is important to clinicians and their patients. So respiratory medicine is a really good example. There are a lot of objective ways of measuring lung function, right? You can measure, for example, total lung capacity. You can measure FEV1. But at the end of the day, what matters to the patient is whether they can breathe better or not. It doesn't matter if it's actually 50 cc's or 100 cc's or 500 cc's. If the patient tells you with this new medication, I can breathe better, I feel better, that's really what's important. So the PROs, the patient-reported outcomes in clinical trials, are actually what's important. So as physicians, we implicitly understand that. Knowledge translation means like, how do you put something on paper into like action in the real world? Okay, so papers will often mention, for example, an NNT of number needed to treat. So is that enough to actually change clinical practice? Well, you tell all the doctors in your group practice that we need to be doing this NNT is significant. So if it is, like, how do you put it into clinical practice? So we know how to do that. We've been doing this throughout our careers, putting evidence into clinical practice. If you really want to make a clinical impact, you have to be a really good storyteller. And we all have real life stories and anecdotes from medical school, from our residency, from our practice. And if you tell a compelling story, it really moves people, and it's a call to action. People are motivated to act so that the same thing doesn't happen to their patient. I can't tell you how many times I've had my colleagues, PharmDs, PhDs, tell me, oh, that was a great story, I'm stealing it. Because, as clinicians, we're the ones that have these, real world stories. Peer-to-peer relationship building, I mentioned this earlier. industry really wants doctors talking to other doctors. So what this means here, though, for you is that essentially you have a couple advantages that other MSLs don't have. So one, you just by being a doctor, you already have a degree of rapport and trust with another doctor, right? There's a joke in med school that doctors don't blow off other doctors. You have that to your advantage. You also will be quite adept at navigating healthcare systems. So MSLs, they find often when they go to hospitals or large institutions that they're not able to get access because of a gatekeeper. There's an MOA or an administrator or something like that that they can't get around, and therefore they can't get face-to-face time with this physician. But you, being part of the system, you already know the MOA, you already know the administrator, you already know the protocols and all of that. And almost guaranteed that if you are an MSL in the same territory where you're practicing now, you will have a much better time with this. So you're able to navigate the healthcare system and talk to the stakeholders that you need to. And then lastly, you're always able to offer a clinical perspective, the cross-functional department. So cross-functional departments would be like sales, marketing, research and development, market access, government affairs, pharmacovigilance, and things like that. I can't tell you how many times someone has suggested something and I'm just able to shut it down right away because I'm like, that's not how the real world works. Like, this is unethical. This would never fly. This is not how medical school works. This is not how hospitals work. We have to try something else. Again, really only clinicians can offer those perspectives. So again, these are all transferable skills. It's up to you to give like concrete examples of these to the recruiters, to the hiring manager, so that they understand what it is that you bring to the table. So let's say that you decide that this is something you want to go for. What do you do next? So you need to research the MSL role. I've given you a very brief synopsis during this presentation, but what I'm really getting at here is you really have to understand the role like in depth. Okay? While you're interviewing, you're going to hear terms like insights, you're going to hear mapping, you're going to hear territory management, you're going to hear value, and you have to understand what this jargon means. And if they ask you about it, you need to be able to answer the question intelligently. So you really need to understand, the MSL role in depth, what it is that they do, and how can I be an MSL? So it's really, really important to research essentially all the job aspects of being an MSL. You will have to write an industry-friendly CV and cover letter. So there is an industry-expected format. It's actually surprisingly sterile. But to my point earlier, you just give the recruiter what they want. This is not the time to have a colorful, graphic-friendly, artsy kind of CV. It's not what the industry is looking for. It's not what they want. And along the same lines, your CV letter, your cover letter and your CV should really be a package so that it's one cohesive application. So it's going to take some time to get your CV sort of up to snuff. You start applying and keep applying. So this takes time. So people sometimes think, okay, 20 minutes after dinner before the kids go to bed, I'm gonna, work on my application. It is probably going to take you about an hour for every application. Most companies have an application portal. You have to upload certain documents in certain places. You're gonna have to cut and paste. The system's always going to be fighting you. Don't even get me started on trying to get bullet points into an online system. It takes time, and initially you're going to end up with a lot of rejections. You're going to revamp your CV, revamp your cover letter. You're going to apply again, and then you might start to get callbacks and things like that. So start applying, keep applying. It really is a numbers game. It is going to be quite difficult at the beginning. Now, that being said, make sure that you learn from every interview. So in med school, there's a saying, every patient has something to teach you. So make sure that you're learning something from every interview. So as an example, if you get asked a question and you don't have a very good answer, make sure you practice that question at home. So the next time you're asked, you have a much better answer. If someone makes a comment that you were fidgeting or you weren't making eye contact, well, again, work on that at home. So the next time you have an interview, those aren't issues anymore. Okay, so learn from every interview. Every successive interview should be better for you. Join a networking group. So there are networking groups on Facebook. I'm sure there are networking groups on those other social media platforms. But you really want to join a networking group. Some of them are just based on being an MSL. Some of them actually might be through, for example, a student association at your university. Some of them might be regional based. Some of them actually might be based on the fact that you're a clinician. But there are lots of networking groups out there. So make sure you try and find one or two that are amenable to your schedule. And then I would also recommend joining one of the two professional societies. So I mentioned there is MSL Society, and there's also Medical Affairs Professional Society, or MAPS. So those are the two big professional societies that represent MSL. So you can join one or the other or both, but they have a lot to offer. Strongly recommended. And then lastly, I really recommend that everyone completes a recognized training course. There is no such thing as a degree in medical affairs. So even if you have your undergrad, even if you have your master's, even if you have your doctorate, you don't have a degree in medical affairs, so to speak. So doing a training course lets you have something on your resume. It demonstrates your dedication, and it's a good talking point with hiring managers and recruiters during your interviews. I do want to caution that this should be a recognized training course. So that means recognized by industry. Unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations and individuals who just sort of act as diploma mills. And essentially, you pay them several hundred or several $1,000s, you get a diploma, but then when you get out into the real world, you find it's actually not valued by industry. They don't consider it to be a very good credential. So make sure that if you do a training course, that it is one of the recognized and valued training courses. Again, if you're networking with people, you can ask them if they've done the training and did they find it useful, who did they go through, and all of that. So just make sure you do your due diligence before you start to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars for these training courses. And you're just going to repeat the cycle over and over and over until you break in. So it takes on average about a year to break in. So again, this is from MSL Society. They poll MSLs who have gotten into industry, and the average is about a year. Some people do take less, maybe 3 to 6 months. Some people do take longer. It could be 1 to 2 years, but the average is about a year. So if you're a clinician and you have a patient base, you have to transition them to other healthcare providers. You just can't leave them high and dry. If you are in school, you want to make sure that you time your applications with your graduation so there isn't a conflict. If you have a family or are planning on starting a family, you have to take that into account. So just keep in mind that you still have to provide for yourself and your family. You still have to cover the bills. So make sure you have a plan for this 1 year to make sure that you're not distracted by other commitments in your life. So networking, 2 ways to network. Networking from home, this is primarily going to be done through LinkedIn. I would recommend looking for people with a common background. So these are the people who could attended your university or your medical school or your residency. Depending on where you live, this could be people within your geographical area. This could be, if you're a clinician, this could be people who are practicing in your specialty within your area. Or you might be lucky enough to have a friend or a colleague who is already in industry, and you can reach out to them. This is really important. Be clear and concise about what you're looking for. So lots of people reach out to me on LinkedIn, and they basically say something like, "I'm looking for advice," or "Can you give me some pointers?" And that's very non-specific and vague. I could speak to you for hours, if not days, giving you advice, and you would never hear the same advice twice. So if you want to make use of this time that you have with this person, I would recommend to make sure that's as concise as possible. So for example, I'm having trouble with behavioral questions. Can you help me work on them? Or I'm having trouble with my cover letter. Can I ask you how you did yours? Or I can't seem to develop rapport with the hiring managers. Do you have some pointers for me? Or I'm, looking to complete one of these training courses. Which one did you do? Did you find it helpful? Okay. Those are sort of the questions that you want to be asking so that, you get a specific question answered and then you have a plan of action. Make sure that you accommodate their schedule. They're donating their time, they're donating their expertise, they're donating, the benefit of their experience. So make sure you accommodate their schedule. It's very off-putting when people try and negotiate with you to find a schedule that suits them. And you might find that people actually just ghost you entirely. So whatever time that they offer, be grateful for it and take it. Respect their time. So if you book half an hour, and that's what I would recommend for an introductory meeting, make sure that you stick to that half an hour. Okay, tell the person that, hey, we're coming on time. I want to respect your time. Would it be okay to book something next week or next month? And most people, are going to be okay with that. If you try and monopolize their time, if you try and keep them on for 45 minutes or an hour when they only agreed to half an hour, the next time they're going to remember, oh my God, I was talking to that person forever. It threw my schedule off. I don't want to do that again. So make sure you respect their time. And again, come prepared. Okay, have a list of questions ready to go. Go through a little agenda with them. Tell them, hey, doctor, thanks for your time. I want to talk about this, this, and this, and make sure that you set expectations and you get through all the things that you want to talk about. If you don't hear back, this is pretty common. It's okay to send a reminder. I would give them 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3, maybe 4, but just keep in mind, they're also, human beings. They have full-time jobs. They could be volunteering elsewhere. They have families. They go on vacation. They have, the same challenges in life that we all do. And they just may not have the time for you. So again, I would send one reminder, and if you don't hear back, I would move on. There's no point sort of pestering them every day or every week. Again, it's really off-putting. Okay, networking in person. So I would recommend going to one of the major medical affairs conferences. I just picked here MSL Society. I would recommend bringing business cards. Don't ask me why, but your hiring managers and the directors love business cards. They're probably going to be baby boomers or Gen X or kind of older millennials, and they just like having something physical in their hand. And to be honest, it's just much easier than technology, right? Whenever people try and do things with Bluetooth or whatever, someone's phone isn't working or configured, batteries die, people drop these things. It's just a disaster. So go to Vistaprint, pay $50, get 250 business cards with your name, your LinkedIn, your phone number, your email, make it look pretty, and just hand these out at conferences. It really does go a long way. Make sure you introduce yourself and chat with everyone that you meet. Basically, you never know, the person standing next to you or the person sitting next to you could be your future hiring manager. This happened to me personally. So at every table, at every lunch, every networking break, you want to introduce yourself and talk with everyone. Most conferences will have an aspiring MSL track. So essentially that means there will be sessions that are recommended for aspiring MSLs. So obviously you can attend any session that you want, but in your best interest, I would attend the aspiring MSL track. This is, these are orientated for people who are trying to break into industry, so why not attend them? Most conferences will have an exhibition hall, and you will find recruitment booths there. So there are some CCOs, contract commercial organizations, that recruit MSLs on behalf of clients. I worked for one in the past. Larger companies like Sanofi, GSK, Merck will typically send 1 or 2 recruiters because, again, they're always looking for talent. So they will have a booth and some recruiters that you can talk to directly. And then there are headhunting organizations, so companies that work with MSL candidates to help them essentially find a job. Again, you'll find them throughout the exhibition hall. So go talk to them, talk about your aspirations, talk about what you might be interested in. And you never know, there could be a position that hasn't been posted yet, or there could be a position that they've had trouble filling, and you could be the perfect candidate. And then lastly, make sure you follow up with everyone once you get home. This is because all the details are still fresh in their head. So make sure you reach out to them on LinkedIn, send them a message, send them an email, something along those lines, and hopefully they'll make a note of it and try and keep in touch, as time goes by. Okay, so this is essentially the last slide. My understanding is that Jim is going to make this available as a PDF to everyone who is attending this course. So these will all be hyperlinked, so you don't have to worry about this. For researching the role, there's a couple good resources I can recommend. So Break Into Your First Role is from Samuel Dyer. That's MSL Society. That book has been around for quite some time. Job Search Mastery was actually just published about a year ago from Tom Carabella. He's the one that also hosts MSL Talk. So him and his team put together this book. I haven't read it personally, but I've heard it's very, very good. And knowing Tom, I'm sure it's outstanding. There is a medical affairs reference textbook from MAPS. If you really, really want to get into the nitty-gritty of medical affairs and how they interact with the other cross-functional departments, this is literally a textbook, but it's very detailed, so we're very well put together. And then there's the famous MSL Talk podcast. I myself have been on several times. Lots of good talks. I would recommend looking for the episodes that talk about breaking in or first job or something along those lines. For societies and networking, I mentioned this earlier, there's MSL Society and there's Medical Affairs Professional Society. You can join one or the other or both. I'm a member of both, and I think they're both great. Training courses, again, MSL Society has an in-person and an online option training course for aspiring MSLs. MAPS has an online training course, and MSL Mastery, which again is Tom Carabella's group, also has kind of a hybrid training course. So essentially there's online modules and then there's virtual meetings with his staff. So research them, see what suits you, see what suits your schedule, see what suits your budget. These would all be excellent. And then conferences, there's 3 big conferences that happen on an annual basis. So MSL Society conference happens typically in September. That's usually held in Miami. MAPS moves around, but this year, or I should say next year, it's going to be held in New Orleans, March 23rd to 26th. And for those of you who are familiar with Fierce Pharma, the biotech pharma news site, they run a conference called MASS. There's one for the East Coast and one for the West Coast. So again, I haven't been yet, but I'm told that they're very good. So these would all be excellent opportunities for some in-person networking and to attend some workshops. So with that, I will close out this presentation. My contact information and my website are at the bottom there. And yeah, Jim, if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
First of all, fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. Thank you. You are a wealth of information, and your passion just comes right through, Dr. Islam. A few follow-up questions. You kind of implied it, but can you confirm that for these particular roles in pharma, neither a license nor boards are generally required of a physician or an MD or a DO?
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Jim. So you do not require current licensure in any country, and you don't require board certification to essentially work in industry. The fact that you have essentially your MD or the equivalent like an MBBS is enough. They just basically want people that can, hold the title of doctor. Occasionally, there are a few positions where they would like people in medical affairs to have a license. So for example, in pharmacovigilance, you might be having to make a diagnosis, and legally only a licensed physician can make a diagnosis. But those expectations will be posted clearly in the job description. And if you do happen to have a license, you'll find that it's a very strong advantage. But as a general rule, just to be sort of a bread and butter MSL, you do not require board certification or licensure.
Awesome. And a follow-up question on the compensation. So it's my understanding that in the insurance industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the device industry, typically people are compensated with both salary and like a cash bonus, like a performance bonus. Do MSLs typically get bonuses as well?
Yeah, so most companies will offer a bonus. It's not a commission-based bonus, as is sales, because obviously that would be a conflict of interest. So companies use essentially different metrics to award bonuses. So some companies, again, will offer a fixed bonus. The average would be 15%. Other companies use a sliding scale depending on your performance, but again, these are non-sales metrics that they're going to be using. But again, typically they're aiming for you to have a bonus of, in the ballpark of about 15%. So that's pretty standard.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, one of the things that we teach, and I thought you did an excellent job with, is building your resume or your CV to be more attractive for a particular industry. And you mentioned, the MAP Society, the MSL Society, going to the meetings, taking the training courses. It's wonderful. All this stuff is available. Are there any other things in terms of work experience, doing clinical research that you would recommend to really make that resume or CV pop from the pile, or saying, well, this person would be a really good fit?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I mentioned earlier that it takes like an hour, to apply for just like one job. Part of that is like you really have to customize your CV and your cover letter for that specific role. So essentially, if you're, let's say you're applying to cardiovascular, you want to make sure that you highlight all of your cardiovascular experience and training on your CV and in your cover letter, so that, to your point, that your CV sort of sticks out. You don't want to bring up things that other fields that aren't relevant. So like now is not the time to bring up your OBGYN, now is not the time to bring up your neurology, because the company is looking for cardiovascular. So you really have to customize each application for the therapeutic area that you're applying for. If you sort of send them like a generic one-size-fits-all CV or a generic one-size-fits-all cover letter, you're going to find that your traction is going to be quite lacking. So it does take a lot of work, and essentially, if you're applying to 20 companies, you can expect to have 20 slightly different versions of your CV and cover letter on your computer. And yeah, it takes time. It's a lot of work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, just a couple more questions. So, you mentioned at the society meetings that oftentimes in the exhibit hall they will have booths recruiting terminal degree folks to become an MSL. Are there any other resources, job boards, online networking that you would recommend to identify opportunities in the field of medical science liaison?
Yeah, so I would, I had always a sort of a multi-pronged approach. So there are obviously job aggregators. So I'm sure everyone has heard of like Indeed and Glassdoor and things like that. So you can set up a search for medical science liaison, as well as some of the other terminology that's used for that role, and basically, use that as one avenue. Another thing is that I would just bookmark the like the career sites for each individual companies, because sometimes the aggregators don't pick up on certain jobs. So you are literally checking with the Merck careers website. You are literally checking with the Pfizer careers website. You are literally checking with the GSK careers website several times a week. I would also check LinkedIn. So jobs are posted on LinkedIn. You can also connect with recruiters, and that's often, especially when they have a very quick timelines, they're typically going to be posting on social media, because obviously the exposure is much greater. And then with your network, you can also ask for words of mouth. So sometimes companies will be thinking about posting positions, or will be thinking of maybe about an internal candidate, but if they receive word of mouth from another employee that they have a really good candidate in mind, they might be willing to entertain an application kind of on an ad hoc basis. So yeah, make sure that your approach is multi-pronged, and you're essentially casting a wide net.
So one follow-up on that one, then one final question. So you said that there's maybe different ways that they would describe an MSL as a job position. What are some of the different ways that could be articulated as a company?
Yeah, there's 1001. If you get
Okay.
one of the books from Our Society or from Tom, it'll be listed there. But there's medical science liaison is by far the most common, but there's also clinical science liaison, community science liaison. There are also science liaisons that focus on other things apart from clinical practice. So you could have, for example, healthcare economics science liaison, or something along those lines. Some companies call them field scientists. Some companies actually just call them field account managers. It sounds salesy, but it's actually a medical position. So there's no standardization for this. So again, when you're creating like your job search reminders, make sure you put in some of these other keywords so you pick up on all of these. I can't tell you how many times I've missed out on field scientist positions because I just wasn't looking for that terminology, and I realized, oh, that's what they call an MSL. So yeah, it's it's almost like alphabet soup. There's quite a few terms out there.
Really, really helpful. One last question, and I've been using your time, which is one of the things you told us not to do, but I'm doing it anyhow because I'm a lawyer and I have hubris. Okay. The last question is, for those doctors who are looking for one-on-one help and coaching, can you talk a little bit more about how you can help them, doctor?
Yeah, so what I do, so on my website, if you go to the contact me section, there's an intake questionnaire. It's actually quite comprehensive. So basically, I'm just going to be asking about your background. I'm going to be asking about kind of if you've had any luck with interviewing, as it is, kind of looking at where you want to go. And then, with that, I can sort of come up with a plan. So usually what happens first is I like to identify strengths. So we like to find out what your transferable skills are. So some people, for example, might already have a lot of presentation experience just through academia or something along those lines. So that's something that we can work to make sure that we highlight during interviews. So that's, kind of just example is one thing. Also, then we're looking at areas of improvement. So usually, these are pretty easy to find out. And then usually what I do is I will come up with basically sort of like a plan with milestones. So in industry, you often hear this expression, what's your 30, 60, 90-day plan? So I do something similar. It's more like 30, 180, and 360. But the point is, we're going to set, find out what you're good at, what you're deficient at, and then, this is what we're going to do for the first 30 days. And that's going to be like fixing your LinkedIn profile, fixing your CV, fixing your cover letter, and then starting to apply. And then what are you going to do in 6 months? Okay, I'm going to attend this conference. I'm going to try and meet with these people. I'm going to do this training course, or something along those lines. And then, a year from now, set similar milestones and try and hold people to that. Yeah, and then, if there are specific, gaps, then I can help to work with that. So I find that a lot of times, I alluded to this earlier, but sometimes doctors are too smart for our own good, and we don't really come across very well when we're speaking with recruiters, because recruiters are essentially working on a checklist and they're just looking for the cookie cutter answer. But us as clinicians, we're always trying to basically impress other people and demonstrate what we know and demonstrate our technical expertise. And it's just over their head. And so the recruiter thinks that you're not prepared, you didn't do your research, or something along those lines, when in fact you actually do qualify. So a lot of what I do is just helping people navigate those stages, explaining to candidates, this is what they're going to ask. This is when you give them the cookie cutter answer. Just answer the question and be quiet. And then when you get to the hiring manager and they're asking you about your experience, now they're asking about what you bring to the table. Now's the time you showcase yourself and go through that. So again, if you're having trouble with specific interview stages, I know what all the questions are. I know how it works. I can help with that.
Dr. Liaison, I just want to close with this. When you spoke for us in person last year, I was in the other breakout session. I didn't get to hear you speak. And Kelly told me you did just absolutely fantastic. It was such a treat. And I'm glad I got to hear you speak, because this is absolutely fantastic. You are a wealth of knowledge. And somebody that really doesn't have you don't have decades of experience in this field. You're just an inspiration. Thank you so much. And we thank you for doing this.